Hello everyone, Jay here from Jay Productions, and welcome to another one of our beginner's guide to Age of Sigmar. Now, in this episode, as you can tell by the title, we're looking at beginning with Skaven, and just letting you know, real, plain casual, what the lowdown is when you're trying to start this faction in Age of Sigmar. So, the Skaven are a classic Warhammer Fantasy faction. They've got a long history, they're devilishly fun to play as, and they give you an excuse to be fairly obnoxious, and they're good if you don't mind losing well, and, you know, having your rats snort a whole bunch of cocaine and then explode, and also if you want to pound people to death with sheer guns, cocaine, and numbers. Now, full disclosure, the first thing you need to be aware of with Skaven is that they are at their core a horde army, but as we'll talk about a little bit later, there are ways around this. So, the first thing you should consider, like you should consider when you look at any Age of Sigmar army and how to get into it, is just to be aware of what is it made up of. For example, when you look at the Stormcast army, referring to my previous video, you see that it's made up of a bunch of different armies that you should probably pick one and bring in elements from the others to support each other. But their synergies don't always work together well. It's the same thing here, because in Skaven you have several clans that you need to be aware of. Now, there's a number of ways to approach Skaven, and a number of ways you can do it with the Skaventide book. So, the first way is to just play Skaven, where it's just a good all-out, grab what you want. In that case, there's some things you're going to need to be aware of, which we'll cover later on. But if you want to focus down and play a specific clan, and these are clans Eshin, clans Verminous, clans Molder, clans Scryer, clan Pestilence, and while the Masterclan is a thing, you don't really need to build an army around it. They're more a support clan, and they've got some rules that feature into that. So if you want to build an army around each of those, it's probably good to decide that early on when you're first starting to buy your things for Skaven. And that is because Skaven have a somewhat confusing Battleline system. And now, this is the most important thing we're going to talk about probably when it comes to starting Skaven, because of this. Now, normally, if you just want to play your Skaven, you know, you want to go for a bit of everything, you like the whole range, you want to add in some Plague Monks, you want to take some Storm Fiends, you want to field some cannons and some Doom Wheels, because, to be honest, it all just looks so good. Well, that's fine. Absolutely do that, it's a lot of fun. And if that's the case, the first thing you need to be aware of is what your Battleline choices are going to have to be every game. If you want to take generic, you are going to be limited to Clan Rats, a disposable but cheapish Horde Infantry, and Storm Vermin, a slightly more elite version of the rats that you shouldn't compare them to anyone else's sort of elite battle line or even elite infantry. They're not, but never underestimate the rats. So, and we talk about, but if you want to play as one of the other clans, the way in which you change your battle line is that everything in your clan has to share the same clan keyword. If you have all different clan keywords, you have to take those generic options, because those are always battle line for you, which means they're always going to be your battle line unless you're building towards a specific clan. Now, what am I talking about? Well, when you want to build a Clan Molder's army, if you want to build towards a Clan Molder army, you should keep in mind that everything in your army will have to have the Clan Molder keyword if you want to field something that's not Clan Rats or Storm Vermin. If you do so, then Giant Rats become battle line for your army. Giant Rats are okay, and they're not, you know, anything to laugh at. I'd probably say they're better than standard Clan Rats, but that's an example. And the same with Rat Ogres. Rat Ogres are another unit that become battle line if your entire army is Clan Molder. And then for Clan Eshin, Night Runners and Gutter Runners. They become Battleline if everything in your army has the Clan Eshin. Now, it does have the clause, and there's other ones, such as the Plague Monks and Plague Censer Bearers. They become Battleline in Clan Pestilence. And for Clan Scryer, you're looking at Scryer Acolytes and Storm Fiends. So, you need to be aware that if you want to focus on a clan, you are self-limiting what you can bring in your army. Because if you want to bring those scary Storm Fiends and Scryer Acolytes and that Scryer heavy build, that's cool. But you are now cutting yourself off from Plague Monks. You are cutting yourself off from the Plague Artillery, their Plague Catapults. You are cutting yourself off from Rat Ogres. You are cutting yourself off from even the standard battle line because they are Clan Verminous. And you are cutting yourself off from bringing anything that isn't a Masterclan. And if you're bringing that Masterclan, it has to be your general in order for you to keep your battle line as it is. And this is really tricky, and it's something you definitely need to be aware of going in, so you are going to self-limit yourself. So it means, in essence, if you really wanted to go full Skaven, you could buy a couple of different armies and eventually field several different armies, because the configurations you could run are greatly different. But if you want to focus in on a clan, and you want to field nothing but that clan, and you want to build as an efficient, quotation marks, efficient for Skaven, then this is how you do it. Now, the most popular one I can immediately think of is if you want to build Plague Monks, and now in the recent months, they have been quote-unquote nerfed. I actually see them as being quite buffed, actually. Streamlined, but buffed. So, if you want to build a Clan Pestilence, you are going to have to build your entire typical 2,000, 2,500 point army, depending on what level you want to play. 1,000 point army being, whatever points level you want to play. You're going to have to start off with Plague Monks, Plague Censer Bearers. They're going to have to be the core of your army. There's nothing else. They're going to have to be the core of your army. And then your HQs are going to be limited to Plague Priests and Plague Priest on Plague Furnace. And your artillery is going to be limited to just the Plague Catapult. And, well, also the, your Rat Demon. Your Vermin Lord Corruptor. That's it. That's all your options. And that's nice. That's actually one of the really good things. If you're feeling overwhelmed when you go to start a Skaven army, focusing in on one of the great clans is probably a good way of just focusing yourself and going, okay, I'm going to start with this small selection, so I just need these things. Rather than looking at the candy store and going, I want a little bit of everything. The focusing down on a clan can help you save money and save decisions on what you need to buy and how you need to equip it. And it's the same for every other one of these sub-factions. Now, if you want to go full candy store and just run a Skaven Tide, it's the double-edged sword, because now you have access to everything, meaning you can no longer take some of these really good units that you would want as Battleline, which means you're always paying the Clan Rat tax, or the Storm Vermin tax. But Clan Rat tax sounds cooler. So, you're always going to be paying that tax if you want to go for everything in the candy store. And now, the great thing about this, though, is, and now we'll start talking a bit about the army itself and talking about some rules, is when it comes to allegiance abilities. Now, I've seen, people now these days are aware of this, but as someone new to Skaven, the first thing you get when you go to Skaven Tide, regardless of what you pick as your clan, is the Teachings of the Horned Rat. And these are 4 very good abilities that you will always have regardless of which clan you pick. And they're all important in their own way. The Bravery one is less important because you should probably be bringing some way to get ignoring battle shock if you're running big hordes. But strength in numbers does help, giving you adding 2 to your bravery characteristic instead of 1 for every 10 models in unit. And when you're running a 40-man rap lob, that's important. But more important is the overwhelming mass. And this is something you really... This allegiance ability is one you really have to think about when you think about running your hordes of rats and how you're configuring them and in what and how many numbers you're running your rats. So, overwhelming mass lets you add 1 to the hit rolls for attacks made with melee weapons by Skaven-tied units while they have 20 or more models. In addition, add 1 to the wound roll for attacks made by melee weapons by Skaven-tied units while they have 30 or more models. Now, why is this important? Well, because of how your units are capped. Because of how certain units are capped at their squad sizes, it means you're very quickly going to lose these important bonuses. Because your rats, they don't hit very hard when they're not buffed, and their only thing they've got going for them is numbers. In addition, your rats are made of glass. They are not gonna live. Don't fool yourself. If you're running hordes of rats, they are not gonna live. This is Age of Sigmar. Everything kills everything, which means hordes die fast. The thing you gotta do, though, is just get your horde hitting first and hitting hard. Now, that's why these are important. So when you look at, for example, Plague Monks, they are capped at 40. They only have a 6-up save. And the only way they get anything added onto that, such as a 6-up to ignore damage, is if you take them in battalions, and in that case they have to be close to their big plague furnace. Now, you've got 40. You lose 10 of them. That's really easy to do with skirmish fire. You're going to lose your +1 to wound very quickly. You want that +1 to wound. You want that +1 to hit. Sorry. Yeah, +1 to hit. So, you want that a lot, and you want that for as long as you can keep it. So, when it comes to your hordes and how you want to field them, it comes to an idea of, well, you should invest your points in, say, if you're taking a nice mixed army of just general Skaven tied, your clan rat tax, you take them in the minimum 20 squads. Don't expect them to keep their buff anytime at all, because the moment they lose 1 model, they're going to lose their +1 to hit, which means the rest of the time they'll be hitting on 4s if they've got swords, or 5s if they've got spears. You know, so they're become expendable meat shields. Of course, you know that going in, so you have to build your army around, okay, this is the unit that I want getting the buff for the longest. I'm going to invest my points into that unit. And a good example of a unit you want to invest that into is something like the good old Plague Monks, who are really killy, with lots of attacks and lots of ways to buff their damage output so that they can actually hit like a truck once that horde gets in. And of course, that means they're also going to be the target of enemy skirmishing fire, and your enemy's not going to want to let that horde get in. Of course, this also means that your non-horde unit, such as your 20 clan rats that you brought just to field your battle line, are not going to be, shot at as much. But it's that key difference of knowing what you're going to take and in what number you're going to take it. If you're going to run, for example, like I do, you run 30 Plague Monks. Not the full max size, but 30 Plague Monks. Because you don't care about the +1 to wound. You only care about that +1 to hit. Yeah, I'm still going to accept the fact that the moment I lose 10 models, I'm going to lose my +1 to hit. Which is fine, because the Plague Monks already hit on a 3+. I'm just hoping that I can get them in there fast enough, though. Otherwise, I'm going to be very defensive with that unit. So it's a matter of knowing where to sink your points. And that's a real trick with Skaven, because there's a lot of really cool things, and you probably want to take them all. At the same time, if you're focusing in on a specific faction, for example, back to the Pestilence example, you're just going to take them all. you are going to take as many of those Plague Monks as you can, because you're going to need to, and it's the only option you've really got. So that's how you do that. And of course, this is something you keep in mind when you feel something like Plague Censer Bearers, for example. You get them in a max size of 20. Well, you're not going to get that +1 to hit longer than a single round. And you're probably going to lose it to some offhand skirmish fire or a single magic missile. It's not going to be there very long, so don't bank on it. So, don't waste your points on taking Plague Censer Bearers in a 20-man blob. Take them in easier to move blobs. Take them in MSU blobs that can work around and maneuver between your big Plague Monk squads to hit what you want to hit. Lead from the back is another allegiance ability. It's not a really important one to keep in mind, but it is an important one that can help you out a bit. And it's important because when you're fielding Skaven, your characters are really important. They are. Your hordes are very important, but your characters are what keep those hordes and your other units functioning at a desirable level. And as a result, lead from the back is important to remember those keywords. Yeah, it's important to keep it in mind because some of your most important units that you would think, some of your most important characters don't have the monster keyword. Certain things such as, very surprisingly, the Claw Lord on, I forget what it's called, it's a Forge World model. It's a giant rat. It'll come to me. Anyway, but more importantly, the things Games Workshop directly that you're probably more likely to encounter, either if you're fighting them or if you're using Skaven, is the Plague Furnace and the Screaming Bell. They will also benefit from the -1 to hit. This means that those two models are actually very defensive. Scurry Away is not something you're typically going to make use of unless you're trying to slingshot a character. And to be honest, if you're using it, things have gone pear-shaped. But, yeah. Now, the Ways of the Great Clan's allegiance ability. Now, this is where things start to get very interesting. If it looks very overwhelming, that is because it can be at first, but the trick is to simply, when you're building a general Skaven tide, know the ones that you're getting based on your list, and if you're just playing a single clan, just know your one, don't worry about the others. Because you get each of these if you include the Eshin, or, for example, the Eshin Masters of Murder. If your army includes any Clan Eshin heroes, at the start of the first battle round, before determining which player has the first turn, you can pick one enemy hero for each Clan Eshin hero in your army. You can re-roll wound rolls for attacks made by friendly Clan Eshin units that target those heroes in that battle. And they're all like that to some extent. You just need to have one of the clan units. For example, you can run a mixed Skaven tide with your Clan Rat Screen, and then have a brick of Plague Monks and the rest of your army be full setup for Scryer shooting. You will get the Verminous, if you have any Claw Lords. You'll get the Plague one, the Pestilence, the Great Plagues, if you have any Plague Priests. And you'll get the Scryer. So it's important to note, did you bring any of the characters from this one? Cool, they give you this one. And this can also mean you can actually run an army, potentially, where you are pretty much using every one of these allegiance abilities, which can be a lot to keep track of, since certain ones are definitely more complex than others, like the Warpstone Sparks, which is a pretty okay ability. Oh, who am I kidding? It's really fantastic because of two of its effects when you build right. The first one is just re-rolling casting. Sure, I'll take that. And the second one is picking up to 3 friendly Clan Scryer units within 13 inches of the hero, wholly within, and adding 1 to the damage characteristic of their missile weapons. Yeah, that's powerful. And so that's where it's important to note for when you're starting out with Skaven, just keeping in mind your allegiance abilities and how you're building your army. And it's a lot simpler than it really sounds. Now, when it comes to your command traits, fortunately, unlike a lot of other factions, you don't have sub-factions under Skaven Tide. So there's no what you would normally see in other factions, like picking a Storm Host or a Temple or an Idoneth Enclave or a Legion of Dead or anything like that, which means you have access to a huge number of command traits and relics really without being restrained, which means you've got a lot of creativity. Now, what this means on the downside is that a lot of your command traits, the first 3 are repeated across the board, and it also means that some of these are only very useful depending on your particular build. So once again, it's important to keep in mind, if you're going to make your command trait, your general, either a Masterclan, are you going to be using that trait and that Masterclan? Is it going to be important? Is it going to do its work for you? And for the relics, same deal. How useful is this? Am I going to get my money's worth? Because you're not, unlike the typical sub-faction layout, you're not going to get a separate command. You're not going to get a certain ability, which, gives you X bonus. And you're not going to get a new command ability for all your units. You don't get any of that. So you have to make your command traits in that count. I mean, your standard command traits, Malevolent is, of your generic ones, the Malevolent command trait is definitely a no. Verminous Valor is definitely worth considering, in fact, the best of the bunch. Savage Overlord adds 1 to the bravery of Skaven Tide wholly within 18. Good, but you have better ways of addressing Skaven bravery problems in your entire army, to the point where you just make them flat out immune to it. And so that's the kind of thing you have to deal with. And then keeping with the Masterclan example, the Supreme Manipulator, you receive 1 extra command point. When you use their allegiance ability to roll a dice, and on a 5+, you receive a command point. If the Masterclan character uses a command ability, you can re-roll the dice. That's good, but the mistake that can be made is you might build your list, bring that, and then end up realizing that you don't really need to use any of the generic command abilities, because sadly, that's all you can use, because only the Vermin Lords actually have a command ability. So while that's great if you're bringing a Vermin Lord Warpseer, who can use his command ability to make everything wholly within 18 immune to battle shock, fantastic. Actually, it's wholly within 26. Looking at that, it's fantastic, because you can use that every time, and you can roll to get a command point back and re-get it, and then you can give something else, provided you manage to get that 5 up with your reroll, and then do it again on something else, and something else, and something else, and you've built around that. If you've brought that on, say, like a Screaming Bell, the chances, and you end up in the rest of your army, well, you end up using other things, and other generic ones from things that are not near your Screaming Bell, that are on the other side, other things that need support. So it turns out to be a waste of a command trait, and that's really the trap with Skaven. You're going to make sure to get the most out of however you are building this. Well, certain things seem fine at first, like Supreme Manipulator. The trick becomes, does this thing have a command ability I really want to use? No. Is it going to be in a position in this battle, in the way I'm running my list, where it's going to be able to just hand out the generic command abilities non-stop, and are they going to be useful to me in the situation? And if they're not, okay, what else can I give my general? And then you might go, the two other ones in Masterclan are very generic, but very good. Master and Magic, adding one to your casting, unbinding, and dispelling, that seems really mediocre at first. It's okay, but it's nothing flashy. Nothing like rerollable dice for regaining command points. No. Master and Magic, however, is reliable though. You are always going to be using it because the Master Clan you put it on, they're a spellcaster. All Master Clan are spellcasters. So +1 to that. Your spells are very good as Skaven. Your spells are very, very good from your Lore of Ruin and from, well, only the Lore of Ruin for Master Clan. But those spells are still very good, and some of them have high casting value, so at extra little bit, that helps. Pair that with a Gnaw Hole, now you've got your Screaming Bell with +2, and you've got a very good spell-casting platform that is constantly making use of the command trait you've picked. Cunning. At the start, after the battle has started, roll a dice. Each time your opponent receives a command point on a 6, you receive a command point instead. Is that going to work every time? No. Is your opponent going to spend command points? Yes. I mean, unless they are Ossiarch Bone Reapers, in which case it's totally useless and redundant. But most factions, and it's a great way to mess with if you're able to list tailor, or you're expecting to fight armies that make heavy use of command points, a great way to just sort of screw them over. But Master of Magic still sits above that, because it's a constant thing that you're going to get your worth out of. And so it's the same with much of the rest of the command traits when it comes to Skaven. You've got to typically pick, and you've got to be very careful about how you do it based on how you're building your list. For example, Clan Scryer, they're a very popular army because of their shooting power and because Skaven shooting is hilariously suicidal. Masterful Scavenger. Add 2 to the number of Warpstone sparks this army's general can use during the battle. So, instead of D3 plus 3, it's D3 plus 5 Warpstone sparks at the start of the game. That's cool. But you'll probably never need more than the D3 plus 3. But, it's something. Compare that to its other ones, Deranged Inventor, which lets you reroll hit rolls made with missile weapons for a Clan Scryer unit wholly within 13 inches of your general. Sure, that's a different kettle of fish. If you're running a Scryer-heavy list, that is always going to be useful. Overseer of Destruction, useful if you're running lots and lots of weapons teams. In particular, it's actually only useful, and pro advice, Overseer of Destruction is only useful if you're running lots of Rattling Guns, which are fantastic, they're just in metal. So, they go on like that, across all of the clans. They each have their own one. You have one for Masterclan, Scryer, Pestilence, Verminous, Eshin, and Molder. Which is fine. They're all good. Typically, you'll be taking from... If you're running a completely mono clan, you'll probably want to take from your clan's specific one and the 3. Going back to our Pestilence example that we've been talking about the entire time. Earlier, when we were talking about running mono clans, Master of Rotten Ruin lets you re-roll your prayer rolls. Fantastic, because the whole premise of all your characters in Clan Pestilence is to cast their prayers to buff your Plague Monks, as we talked about. And you want those buffs. They are really good, and they make your already really good Horde unit into a savage blender. So that reliability on something you're going to be using is fantastic. Architects of Death. That one lets a Clan's Pestilent unit, wholly within 18 of the general, reroll wound rolls made with their missile weapons. Sure, that's okay. Then consider this. If you're running only a Clan Pestilence army, how many Plague Catapults are you going to bring to make that worth it? And then Diseased is a 4-up an enemy unit within 3 inches of your general takes D3 mortal wounds. Sure. But I think you can already see here, just from listening to those 3 examples, which one you want to bring of the 3 specific ones to a Clan Pestilence if you're running a mono Clan Pestilence build. While the other ones sound cool, are you going to get that use out of them? Because Skaven, if you're not making them as efficient as possible, you're going to have a fun time losing. But you will lose. You will lose if you don't take your Skaven seriously. Which is part of the charm that I personally love about Skaven, is that even if you pick something completely, not fantastic, like Disease, the Skaven themselves are still very fun to run, and they can still kick up a storm. I mean, if you're playing competitively, your choices are obvious, but if you're playing for fun, like you should be, then all of a sudden, this book is full of just lots of really fun customization, which means there's also lots of really fun combos. It means you never have to play even your mono Pestilence army the same way twice, which personally for me is a bonus of any army if they let you do that. The relic selection is a little bit different, and why I say this is because your relics range from mediocre to downright awesome, but you're really going to be limited on what you can take, because the Skaven have a bit of a problem when it comes to battalions. And what do I mean by this? Well, your battalions are going to be costly, and they're not exactly fantastic. If we talk about them for a moment, as I flick to it, we can see that your typical, there's not a great variety of them. Let's put it that way. And the points cost equal to what you're taking is not hugely great. Ironically, Clan Pestilence, they have the most, of all. They have the most War Scroll battalions of all of the clans. And they range from absolutely mediocre to potentially pretty good. And it leads to a thing of, sure, if you're Clan Pestilence, some of these are really easy to build. So you're probably going to want to build them anyway when you build your Mono Pestilence army. Which means you're going to have multiple choices for the, relics. You'll be able to bring multiple ones. Which means you might be able to put one, on a Grey Seer if you've got one, or other Masterclan if you've got that leading your army. Or you might be able to deck out each of your fun little Pestilence heroes, like your Plague Priest, or your Plague Priest on Plague Furnace, or the good old Vermin Lord Corruptor. Fantastic option for putting a relic on. But that in itself is a bit of a problem for a general Skaven-type army. And specifically for certain other themed armies as a result as well. Because while Pestilence have, 3 that are easy to build plus a super battalion, no one cares about those, Scryer literally only have 1. And it is a super battalion, which means your entire army is going to be 1 battalion made up of 2 mini battalions. And it has its tax, and its tax is not super great, but it also means this army is super expensive because the thing is super expensive, and those mini battalions don't actually give you extra relics because it's still technically 1 battalion. It's just made up of different covens. And to elaborate on this, you take your Warp Club Convocation, which requires that you have 1 Arch Warlock. You have 1 Arch Warlock, sure, and then 2 to 5 Engine Covens. And each Engine Coven requires a Warlock Engineer or Warlock Bombardier, 1 to 3 of something, 1 to 5 of something, and then 1 to 5 of something else. All of which are Skaven Scryer options. That gets expensive, and it still means you're bringing a lot of stuff and still only getting 1 battalion for what you would essentially be building, 2 battalions worth of things. So, Scryer have some really fantastic relics. Makes sense, they're the inventing rats. You're always going to be, at max, getting 2 of those. So, make your peace with that, because that's going to be your whole army. The Claw Horde is a nice and easy one, and it's probably the most generic, because it, in a general Skaven Tide army, it gives you all the things you typically want in, it gives you your tax. But is it worth it? That's where the debate comes in, and something you should be aware of if you want to build this around it, because it's tax plus. Because you're paying for your tax units as a generic Skaven Tide with your 2 Clan Rats, 1 Storm Vermin, and a Claw Lord, and the bonus you get is to make your tax slightly more effective. And that in itself is probably not worth it, because it's still a tax if you're generic Skaven Tide. I mean, if you're playing full Verminous, which, kudos, you are a very brave person for wanting to paint that many rats, go to town. Run 3 of these. Live in all the relics. Make sure you buy yourself some of the Forge World Claw Lords on the giant rats. At the same time, your Flesh Meld Menagerie for Clans Mulder, that's something you're going to build around as an army, which means you're going to get 2 relics. But it's really hard to justify some of these it's really hard to justify some of these battalions outside of mono builds. So that's just something to be aware of. Your relic options are really going to be limited, so choose wisely. They're pretty much all good choices, except for maybe one in every block, but they're good choices. And they're fun, because, who doesn't love just taking a single brass orb and loving a Hail Mary on a 6, I will kill Nagash. I mean, it will only work 1 in 100 games, but the time it does, the Nagash player will literally lose his shit, and that is worth everything. Because you're Skaven, you should be screwing with people like no tomorrow. Now, the thing about Skaven now is we've talked about their allegiance, the things you need to know about them. And now the rest of this video can be really summarized as, well, what is good, what is a trap in terms of units, what are some things that you should keep an eye out when you're trying to build your army? Well, here's the thing. Let's talk for a moment about, since we're right on this, let's talk about price and leaders. This is an army that you're either going to have a lot of leaders or very few leaders, in which case your price points wise and your price money wise is best invested in something like a Vermin Lord, because they're good leaders and they are adaptable, and they definitely lend themselves more to supporting mono builds. And it comes to a question of, if you're not doing a mono build, which Vermin Lord is best for you if you want to save on model count and invest your points into that? Well, the named character, Lord Screech Vermin King, is probably your obvious choice for generic Skaven Tide, followed by the Masterclan one, the Warpseer, who is a fantastic CP battery that is a fantastic spellcaster. Bada bing, bada boom. Done. That eliminates you having to bring a whole host of different supporting characters. On the opposite side, if you are bringing a army that is, all Eshin, or rather all Pestilence, sticking with our Pestilence example that we've been running, the Vermin Lord Corruptor is a no-brainer. You don't need to consider, if you're bringing a generic Skaven Tide list would, where do I bring the Warbringer or do I bring a Deceiver? No, your option is clear-cut. When it comes to general Skaven Tide, it should typically come to a matter of, what are you bringing more of? If you're investing and going full ham on your tax as generic Skaven Tide, and you're bringing all the Clan Rat tax and all the Vermin, Storm Vermin, well, the Vermin Lord Warbringer is going to give you more mileage than, say, the Vermin Lord Corruptor would, if you would bring that just to support your 1 brick of Plague Monks. You're better off bringing your Vermin Lord Warbringer and then bringing a Plague Monk to support your small brick. You need those characters, so making sure you wisely do so is a good way to do it. But a good rule of thumb is a Grey Seer on Screaming Bell and a Grey Seer in general, you can never go wrong with, because you can include these in as well as the Warpseer. The reason why these are good is that no matter what, you can include them in the army and not break your mono battle line. And if you're in generic Skaven Tide, they're good casters with good abilities. So there's that to go with. And they just make decent generals on the run when you haven't built for a very specific purpose. Thankwall can technically fall into this category as well, but, you know. If you bring Thankwall, if you've read the books, you know he's doomed to lose. But you can do a true Thankwall and blame it on someone else. Arch Warlocks, Warlock Engineers are mandatory if you're running Skaven. At least one Warlock Engineer is mandatory if you're running any sort of Scryer units. If you're investing heavily in Scryer, you want the Arch Warlock, as well as a Warlock Engineer. And if you want something better than a Warlock Engineer that can actually contribute to the fight, you want the Warlock Bombardier, which is a Warlock Plus. And that's the simple games of it. If you want the stuff, you're going to probably fill up. Full disclaimer, you're probably going to fill up, if you're a generic Skaven Tide, your whole selection at a 2,000 points level with a full selection of 6 characters. That's probably going to happen. It's a bit of a trap, so make sure you are being aware of what characters you do and don't need. Do you really need that Claw Lord? Do you really need that Warlock Engineer? Yes. No. That's the debate you'll have to find with yourself. When you come to mono, the trick will be, do I have 2 Plague Furnaces, or do I have 1 Plague Furnace and a bunch of Plague Monks, or Plague Priests, to support my Plague Monks and Censer Bearers and Catapults? And the answer to that question is, on that example, is you should bring 2 of those Furnaces. You should. They're fantastic if you're running mono. Pestilence. Fantastic. Their buffs are too good, and they hit really well. They're good units. Looking at Scryer, you know, when it comes to Scryer, some things to be aware of is Warp Lightning Cannons are amazing, but people will yell at you if you get really lucky. Scryer Acolytes are ridiculously expensive, not points-wise, but model-wise, so you're better off bringing Storm Fiends. And while Storm Fiends are expensive model-wise, more so than the Scryer Acolytes, they're definitely better when you invest in them. And they're not a unit you should definitely bring one of. Just a pro tip, if you're going to bring Storm Fiends in a Clan Scryer, bring more than 1 unit, or bring more than a minimum sized unit. And at the same time, while you're doing it, don't bother with Grinder Fists, and don't bother with Warp Fire Projectors. Go full Rattling Cannon, go Wind Launchers, and, you know, your choice of melee weapon. And then buff the shit out of them. That's how you run Storm Fiends. Just a quick aside. But when it comes to running a generic Skaven Tide, you do have this huge variety of things. For example, a fun little thing to keep in mind when you're running generic Skaven Tide is the Skaven's definite lend towards its playstyle is to sacrifice your tax units, sacrifice units to allow more important, often very fragile units to do their one task. If you've come up against a unit of opposing 20-man Hearthguard, well, the goal there is to make sure those Hearthguard charge a brick of Clan Rats, and it doesn't matter if those Clan Rats live or die, those Clan Rats have bought you a turn with which to maneuver 2 of those Warp Fire Throwers that you brought, and douse them in mortal wounds. And you risk exploding on them so that you really double down on the mortal wounds, so you get as close as possible, now that they're all nice and bunched up after killing your Clan Rats. That's cool. That's what your Clan Rats are there to do. And that's the case with a lot of the Skaven playstyle. Something dies in exchange for you to do something of far more significant value. Your Plague Monks die so that your Plague Censer Bearers can do something of more significant value. Although, that's how it should be, as someone giving you advice as to how to, you know, things to know about Skaven when you're doing it. I would definitely suggest the opposite. You use the Plague Censer Bearers to actually screen, and then have the Plague Monks finish it off. Just, you know, Plague Monks are better. They really are better. But that is the thing. And that's really what it takes when it's things to keep in mind when it comes to Skaven. The real trick of Skaven is you've got the candy store, what do you pick? And picking wisely. And a lot of that can come down to price, how you want to build. And you'll probably end up owning, if you really want to go full Skaven, you'll end up owning more Skaven than you'll ever use. But it means you'll be able to be pretty much unpredictable every time you show up to a tournament. You'll be able to just bring something different every time. And the same if you're just playing at your local friendly gaming group. You become known as the Skaven player. Well, people can't build a counter to you if you change your Skaven list to be something completely different every time. That's the power of Skaven. If you're playing mono, the important thing is to know to build towards that when you first start the Skaven. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a position like some Skaven players ended up who migrated over from Warhammer Fantasy, where you've got a nice spread of everything. It means you can't really form a cohesive army that performs well the way you want it. And it means you're playing that Skaven tide. It means you can't bring that big army that you want where it's lots of monsters supported by cannons, because you have to pay for a whole bunch of rats first because you wanted to include that Hell Pit Abomination in there. So that's just the important thing to keep in mind. And that's really easy. Skaven are a really easy faction to start with in terms of building. Mastering them as a playstyle is definitely where it becomes more interesting. As I said, it's definitely one of the things if you've got to really make your units worth it. They can punch well above their points level. You just got to figure out how to keep them alive long enough to do so. And you're a horde army. Don't be afraid to spam something. The great thing about the Skaven as a model line is that they're cheap because of this. If you like Doom Wheels and you think Doom Wheels are going to win you games, I won't argue on whether or not that will actually happen. Doom Wheels are only 55 Australian. So, 35 probably US. Buy them. Spam them. 160 points. Boom, 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 boom. Fill out all your artillery... no, they're behemoths for some strange reason. Yeah, fill out all of that slot with just... Fill out all of that with just Doom Wheels. And if that sounds fun to you, do it. You're Skaven. Things are either going to go incredibly right for you or incredibly wrong for you. Especially if you're Scryer. Because in Scryer, things will explode. Now, that's a general principle of the Skaven fighting style in general. Each clan has their own style. They work together and have a very combined arms approach in generic Skaven Tide. And if you're not playing generic Skaven Tide, the goal is to literally play into, obviously, your faction's preferred style and spam it to the ends of the earth. You've got 2,000 points to work with. Spam the most powerful things that your particular, clan can do. They look daunting because they have a lot of unit choices, but they're real simple that way. An important thing to keep in mind, though, with Skaven is something you should be aware of when you're starting them, is if you want to go to allies, you will be looking at Nurgle as your only ally, and only if you clan Pestilence. You have no other allies because no one likes Skaven, and they're full of backstabbing, betraying rats that are insane and snort cocaine. But that's something to be aware of, which means if you want allies, you're going to have to go to mercenaries. And to be honest, you have more than enough units that do more than enough different roles that you'll be able to, not really bother with mercenaries. The only time you should really be bothering with mercenaries is if you're playing a mono clan. And if you're playing a mono clan and you feel that you have a niche in your army that's not being supported, and mercenaries is the place you go to, you should probably ask yourself, would it be better if instead of mercenaries and, the downsides of losing command points that those give me, and, the bravery issues, would I be better off just switching to General Skaven Tide and just paying a little tax and restructure my list and to include the tax and then include that one unit I want or need to fill in my gap? That'll be the debate you have to have with yourself. And to be honest, given how Skaven work, you're probably better off as a monoclan sticking within your allegiance, because for everything that you include that's not of your clan, because the great thing about your allegiance abilities, as we mentioned, is it's really easy to get all of the different clan ones, and they're all useful to some extent. Except for Eshin, you actually need to... Actually, no, even Eshin's fantastic, because even with Eshin, if only you include one assassin in your entire Skaven Tide list, he still gets to pick that one enemy character, and Eshin units in your army get to re-roll wounds against it. Well, guess what? That is one really determined one assassin you've got there. It's still a free benefit. It still works. So that is what you keep in mind with that. Now, Skaven are an army that is anywhere between really fun to play but not going to win to, depending on how you build, hilariously cheesy. Where would I rank them in meta for you as a new player if you're considering it? Is I wouldn't rank them at all, because they can play at any level. And that's also something important to note as a beginner level. If you want to play something that can go from really casual with your buddies to fairly competitive and come strong in at a local tournament, Skaven are an army for you. Now, as always, this is my sort of view and how to begin at this, but full disclaimer, the reason why these videos take so long for me to produce is because I go out and I actually talk with a lot of people online and a lot of people in the local communities about their thoughts, views, and opinions about each of these armies that I make the beginner's guide to. And as always, as we're about to finish up here, please comment below if you have any questions, or if you just want to discuss what I mentioned here today about how you begin with Skaven. I'm not going over everything in the book, and that's simply because I don't need to. You can find a lot of the rules online. All the War Scrolls are available for you to check out, and, you know, even from the War Scrolls, consider what is good, what isn't, what you want to buy. And, you know, there's a lot of great resources, and you can find and speak to experienced Skaven players, and of course, just buy the book. Because if you're going to, you know, play an Age of Sigmar army, or any Warhammer army in any system, you're gonna need its Codex Battle Tome. I don't even know what they're called in Horus Heresy, because I don't play that one. But, yeah. Anyway, this has been Jade Productions' beginning guide to starting Age of Sigmar Skaven Tide. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more of these in the future. And if you want to request, you know, if you want to know about a specific army and how to start it and some things to avoid and some general advice from various players in the community, put it in the comments below. I'll go research it. I'll go do everything. I'll go the whole 9 yards and produce a video for that one to let you know what you want to know. In the meantime, I'll just continue chugging through these as more and more Age of Sigmar armies are released. And now, as of making this, Seraphon, the last army that needed to be updated, has finally been updated. So at last, going forward, all we have left is new armies, which are going to be a whole new fun kettle of fish to figure out how to start with them. Alright. Until next time, I've been Jay from Jade Productions.